I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. My theme today is This is what feminist logic looks like. A recent controversy over a campus men's rights discussion reveals the megalomania of revolutionary feminism and the intolerance it tends to produce. A little over a week ago, a group of students at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, British Columbia wrote an open letter critical of the Simon Fraser Advocacy for Men and Boys Club, which had brought in men's rights dynamo Karen Straughan on November 8, 2015. Her talk, Toxic Masculinity and Toxic Femininity, addressed the manner in which men and women both engage at times in destructive forms of gendered behavior. The phrase toxic femininity responds to the feminist formulation of the now widely used phrase toxic masculinity, which implies that manhood, only manhood, is culturally damaging. Right on cue, the feminist students who call themselves the Communication Graduate Caucus and the Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies Student Union felt it necessary to raise an objection, and their letter seeks to convince the Advocacy for Men and Boys Club that if they are, quote, serious about improving life for men and boys, they, quote, might want to learn from feminists, who they claim have been working to make the world a better place for men for a long time. I was going to say that their letter represents a new low in feminist hypocrisy, but I'm not sure new lows are possible at this point. Perhaps it's safer to say that in every sentence from that so generous offer to counsel the AMB in effective activism, to their humble recognition that, quote, feminist movements are not immune from critique, the letter is a definitive expression of feminist psychological projection, in which unpleasant aspects of one's own group behavior are projected onto another group. As such, it is well worth examining with some care. As many of you may know, Karen Straughan has herself posted a video with a point-by-point rebuttal of the open letter, which I highly recommend. As much as possible, I'm going to avoid repeating the points Karen's already made, simply adding a few of my own about this revealing document. The main thrust of the open letter is the now standard double-pronged attack by feminists against any attempt, no matter how measured, nonpartisan, and ideologically inclusive, to think outside of the feminist framework about the problems facing men and boys today. First, the predictable feminist MO employed in the letter is to question the integrity and sincerity of men and boys advocates, stating that their real intent is to attack women. This is a simple logical fallacy, often called the appeal to motive, where an argument is dismissed without engaging with its substance through an unverifiable allegation about intentions. It's out of order. Second, feminists typically argue, as do our letter writers, that anti-feminist advocacy is wrong because feminism addresses male problems too, not just women's. This often involves the fallacy of single cause, in which feminists claim that the problems of men are caused by patriarchy and other factors related to patriarchy, capitalism, the military-industrial complex, and so on. Factors that feminism seeks to dismantle, and that in this way feminism is working for male good. If feminism is already working for male good, according to this line of thought, then attacking feminism actually harms men and boys. It's a perfect circle of feminist logic that enables our letter writers to claim the moral high ground even as they issue veiled threats to the Advocacy for Men and Boys Club that if they don't get with the feminist program will be gunning for them. Unfortunately, it's not an empty threat, as I'll discuss in a moment. Now it's worth noting the plethora of logical fallacies in the letter, which suggest a group mindset so accustomed to hearing its claims echoed back with no real debate that it is unable to reason according to the basic rules of argument. Let me mention just a small sample of the open letter's glaring sleights of hand. One that I've begun to suspect is a staple in the feminist style of argument is the false dilemma, where only two, usually equally unpalatable choices, are named, as when the feminists magnanimously offer AMB the option either to accept feminist theories' claim that masculinity is the real problem facing men, or admit themselves liars and woman haters. They say, quote, "If you want to work alongside feminist efforts to build a more just world while focusing on boys and men, we support that. But if your activism continues to spread lies and misinformation about women and feminism," end quote, then they don't approve, obviously. Well, with such a false dilemma, they deliberately preempt the possibility of any good faith non-feminist discussion of men's issues. Notice also the outrageous question begging here. What lies? No lies have been proven or even alleged in the letter. I suppose it is the lie that feminism doesn't help men, but that's not a lie, but an argumentative claim that many anti-feminist activists, including Karen Straughan, have supported meticulously and logically. Another widely recognized fallacy employed in the open letter is the guilt by association charge, as when the writers opine that, quote, "The rise of what has been framed as men's rights activism on university campuses is sadly in line with other conservative reactionary groups, e.g., white supremacist student groups." Actually, the attempt to discredit a movement, not by attacking its documented claims, but by falsely aligning it with other groups deemed unacceptable, is, quote, "sadly in line with dishonesty in argument." Equally dishonest and manipulative is the use of a false equivalency, as when the letter writers deplore the AMB group's use of, quote, "the language of liberty and free speech," to both discredit the experiences and voices of marginalized groups and commit coordinated campaigns of terror against them when members of those groups speak out. The link supposedly proving the coordinated campaign of terror takes us to an article about the unproven anonymous threat made online against feminists at the University of Toronto last September, a threat which may just as well have been posted by a feminist as by a disgruntled men's rights activist, and which was investigated by police and found to be not credible. But that isn't even the main point. The point is that defining free speech used to discredit an ideological adversary as in any way equivalent to a coordinated campaign of terror is entirely illegitimate. It conveniently suggests that any criticism of feminists or other marginalized groups can, depending on who's launching the criticism, be deemed terror. Yes, I know, that's exactly what these groups want, to outlaw any discrediting of their claims. So much for rational debate amongst the intellectual elite. Well, I've only scratched the surface, but I hope enough to show how this letter is a textbook illustration of the typical logical fallacies that first-year university students are supposed to learn to avoid. Of course, it's difficult to argue well, especially in the heat of the moment. I know I don't always succeed in debate. But this letter, posted a full month after the offending talk by Karen and presented as a joint effort, was presumably the result of collective deliberation with sufficient time to craft and reconsider. That it is so muddled suggests, in my opinion, something about the arrested intellectual development induced by the feminist worldview. Now let me turn to the explicit content and context of the letter, with a focus on one of the final assertions of the writers, the one that essentially justifies the whole attack and provides its rationale. Here the writers refer with a dramatic flourish to the hostile climate in which women are forced to go about their studies at Simon Fraser University. That climate, they say, is one in which, quote, "women are always already dealing with intolerable levels of institutionalized sexism in the form of discrimination, harassment, and violence." By the way, I love that "always already," the little nod to the deconstructionist philosopher Jacques Derrida, master of linguistic obfuscation. I suppose his phrase was brought in to give a sophisticated intellectual frisson to the piece. Well, out of all the dubious claims in the letter, this statement about intolerable levels of institutionalized sexism may be the most preposterous, appearing without a single example, link, statistic, or reference. Consider a few facts. Simon Fraser University, like every other university in Canada, has a gender imbalance that favors women. At the undergraduate level, as of fall 2014, women outnumbered men by a ratio of 54 to 46. And if we remove the figures for the Faculty of Applied Science, which is the only faculty where men still significantly outnumber women, if those figures are removed from the undergraduate total, the number is a more striking 59% women to 41% men. In education, which certifies the teachers who will shape the learning environments of girls and boys, women outnumber men by a staggering ratio of 80 to 20. In the health sciences, where decisions about health policy and funding priorities are made, the breakdown of women to men is 72% women, 28% men. Although the faculty is not gender balanced, women are making steady progress and are, as we know, heavily favored by employment equity policies. In a situation of such marked female student preponderance, two questions arise. How is it that institutionalized sexism continues to exist, especially with feminism the major theoretical framework in most faculties? Moreover, if the situation is indeed intolerable, as the letter writers claim, why do these faculties continue attracting so many women, their numbers increasing nearly every year? I find the feminist claim unjustified and highly unlikely. The historical evidence all points in the other direction, in fact, that Simon Fraser's gender imbalance has created a situation of female privilege and arrogant unconcern regarding the experiences of its minority male population. Just a few years ago, in 2012, an attempt to open a men's center, a space for men to meet in a male-positive environment, ignited vociferous resistance and was eventually put on hold. The SFU Women's Center, in contrast, has been in uncontested operation since 1974, subsidized by student fees, including male student fees, of course, which pay for this women-only space, with its couches and chairs, its fully equipped kitchen, and its free sanitary pads, condoms, tea, and coffee. In a video created by SFU Feminists and preserved by Jonathan Taylor, host of Boys and Men in Education, various students opined at length about why a men's center was not only unnecessary, but a waste of resources and a danger. This video is well worth watching. The feminist students expressed their views that the center would become a highly masculinized space, a heteronormative space, that it would not take into account the experience of marginalized men, would not be trans-inclusive, would make victimized men feel unsafe, and would end up being just another boys' club, a place to celebrate, heaven forbid, hegemonic masculinity. One woman, in perhaps the most overtly Twilight Zone moment of the video, dismissed the men involved in the proposal for the center because they had, quote, no experience of being a subordinate or marginalized man. How ironic to watch these feminist women and men pronouncing with such confident disdain on men's failures of inclusivity and sensitivity. At present, nothing has come or seems likely to come of the men's center idea, and a recent article in the student newspaper The Peak lectured any men foolish enough to think of re-entering the debate that for such a center to be, quote, successful, non-sexist, non-racist, and unprejudiced, it must not, quote, exist solely in opposition to existing feminist frameworks, but should rather look critically at the structures of masculinity they've been taught. It sounds an awful lot like the open letter to the AMB lecturing men's advocates on appropriate and inappropriate forms of activism. So let me get this straight. Women outnumber men overall on campus and vastly outnumber them in every faculty except the sciences. An attempt by men in 2012 to set up a men's center was decisively quashed by feminist students who felt perfectly comfortable dictating to men on campus about what they were allowed to think and how they were allowed to organize, and were powerful enough that their views prevailed. All spoke of masculinity in negative and contemptuous terms, and referred to the men trying to organize the center without any sympathy or understanding. A few years later, the newly formed AMB Club was similarly schooled in the kinds of theories and practices it should adopt if it wants feminist approval. We know that feminist power on university campuses is so strong that, as has happened at Ryerson University just recently, men's clubs can be denied the accreditation and funding that every other club receives on campus simply because they are not feminist. And yet, these same ideologues claim that women are the ones who experience, quote, intolerable levels of institutionalized sexism, and men the ones who need to re-educate themselves out of their blinding privilege. The mind boggles. If institutionalized sexism exists, when the choices, claims to equal status, and self-identity of one sex are controlled and defined by the other, when one sex acts with impunity to discredit, devalue, and demean the other, then SFU is indeed rife with institutionalized sexism, and the authors of the open letter stand condemned by their every word.